Is the Power A Fusion Pro controller better than Xbox's first-party Elite Series 2? Well, the answer is kind of. Now, to quickly describe what a Pro controller actually is, it's going to be any controller that's designed and has features that's going to give you a competitive edge in whatever game you're playing. So this can come in many forms, such as hair triggers, programmable back paddles, customizable analogs or D-pads, and there's a ton of other nuanced options out there. Now, obviously, when price and money isn't a factor, it's going to be hard to beat something like the Elite 2, but we are mainly here to talk about the Fusion Pro controller. So let's go ahead and dive into my experience and review. So right away, I can say that the paddles on this controller feel amazing, and I'd even argue that they're more comfortable than the Elite 2. They basically have the perfect placement and spacing, and I do like the size better than the new Elite 2's mini paddles. They have a pretty satisfying tactile feel to each press, so nothing's going to be too mushy here. And on top of how nice the paddles feel, they're very easy to program and there's no need for any app or software. Just use the onboard mapping button and then you're basically good to go. Now, even though these paddles are great, there are two cons that need to be mentioned. So even though that onboard mapping does make it really easy to get everything set up, you don't have the option to make different preset profiles. So if you do have different preferences for different games, you will have to remap those buttons every time. And then the next one is a very small annoyance, but I do find myself randomly clicking the paddles by accident with the tips of my finger right here in the center of the controller. So this might not happen to a lot of people, and it's going to vary depending on how you hold and press the paddles, but it has happened enough to me that I thought I should mention it. So up next are the triggers and bumpers. You do have the option to engage hair triggers by moving this little tab, and I'd say it feels about identical to the Elite versions. You're going to have three options: a long, medium, and short trigger pull. But I do sometimes accidentally move that tab while picking up the controller. And this just has to do with it being horizontal instead of vertical like the Elites. The bumpers so far have seemed to have absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're really easy to press and you can basically click them from any angle or edge and with basically any part of your finger. So the bumpers are kind of getting an A+ in my book, and I think anybody that's owned an Elite controller or an Xbox controller knows the bumpers fail constantly. So time will tell if the Power A's are going to hold up or not. The analogs are also really nice, smooth, and interchangeable. Their tension is a little less than the newer version of the Xbox controller, but a good amount stronger than the Elite one. So I'm going to say it hits a really good neutral sweet spot. I'd also say all the buttons overall feel really nice and responsive, but I do have one huge negative, and that's going to be the D-pad. So I don't play fighting games or many platformers, so I really don't use the D-pad for much besides navigating menus and settings. But even with this, I've realized I absolutely hate this D-pad. It's extremely mushy and unresponsive, and it's really hard to tell when you're fully pressed one direction or the other. And for some reason, the right input can move a lot, but it won't fully register until you push it just a little bit further. So a lot of times I'll think I've pressed the button, but nothing happens in game. And then another thing I've noticed is sometimes when you're switching between left and right, it can register an up input. Now this doesn't happen a lot unless you're really trying to fly through menus, but I did want to warn anybody that's playing fighting games, you might not want to pick up this controller. And even though this is a huge negative, I almost solely play shooter games. And as most of you know that do play shooter games, you really don't ever use the D-pad. So it's not going to be a deal breaker for me, but it is very annoying. Now, the last major positive would have to be the grip and texture of the controller. It's like a soft, warm, rubbery felt material. It's not better or worse than the Elite 2, but miles ahead of any fully plastic controller. So I was actually really surprised at how good it felt in my hands. And for the last point of the controller, it's kind of going to be up to personal preference, but this is a wired only controller. So if you're playing on PC, most likely you're going to be using a wired connection, so it won't really matter there. And if you're on Xbox, you don't really have to worry about charging your controller. Now, I really thought this was going to be annoying and kind of a deal breaker for me, but it's honestly been nice just always having my controller on and ready to go, because I almost never turn off my console because I'm constantly going through all these Game Pass titles. And I guess a few positives to add on to the cord: it is fully detachable for storage or travel, and it also has that old style like quick disconnector that used to be on the 360 cords, so you're really not going to trip up on it too much or knock anything over. So overall, I do think the Fusion Pro controller is the best budget option in the Pro controller category. And if you're wanting to get into using back paddles or hair triggers, but you don't really want to dish out a lot of cash for an Elite or a Scuff or anything like that, I would highly suggest looking at Power A's options. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to check out our TikTok channel or even our Game Pass series where we're randomly playing every game. And I'll see y'all in the next one.